Have you told your friends that you see ghosts?
Oh, absolutely not.
Gina Rodriguez returns in Not Dead Yet.
I'm back, baby.
Who is that?
Oh, she's the obituary writer.
And Brad Garrett joins the brilliant ensemble cast.
Titan, Maverick, Titan of all Mavericks. These are all words used to describe me.
Not Dead Yet. Season premiere. Tonight, 8:30, 7:30 Central on ABC. And stream on Hulu.
It's the Happy Families podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
Last week on the Happy Families podcast, I shared the things that I've learned this year, the what went well, what didn't, and what 2024 is supposed to look like based on the stuff that has stood out to me. Today, it's the turn of Mrs. Happy Families. Kylie, let's hear your year in review. I'm excited for this. I love doing this whole introspective insight kind of thing. I feel like it's just so... it's inspiring. It's motivating when you look at what's happened during the year, what you've overcome, where you've fallen down, and what you want to do next year. It's hopeful. I love this process.
When you shared your insights last week in relation to the year, I was thinking about my list and just kind of feeling like I really didn't have anything meaningful to share. It's actually a difficult process to sit down and to actually take some introspection on the year that's been, especially when, as we've already acknowledged, our final few months of the year have been just so challenging, and it kind of takes up all your energy and viewpoint. And so for me to sit in that space and to think back on the things that took place, I was actually blown away at how much growth and progress I've made personally in my life. I think the thing that stands out to me the most is having our big kids move to the Sunshine Coast at the beginning of the year. Hands down was such a beautiful highlight of my year, and having them close to us meant that I was able to be a more hands-on support to Chanel as she grew, as her body was growing this beautiful, amazing baby that came into our life later in the year. But the relationship that has developed with our son-in-law as we've been closer has been such a absolute delight.
Yeah.
I've just loved seeing them grow as a couple and now as a family, and seeing the way they add beauty to our family at home.
Can I chuck something in here? I know this is your what went well list, and I wish that I'd said something about this, because when you say that, I reflect on how when we got married, we just wanted to move as far away from our families as we could. We wanted to get distance. We wanted to be our own people. We wanted to be independent. We really wanted to do it ourselves. And I feel like we missed out on a lot because of that. Whereas we've got these kids nice and close. They're still doing it on their own. They're living their independent lives, but there's something beautiful about the closeness. I'm disappointed that we missed that with our families because we had to do it our way. I'm grateful that we've created an environment in our home where our kids want to be close to us. To me, that is the ultimate gift. And I just wish that we'd had the insight when we were younger to give that gift to our parents. Tell me about what went well, your next insight, your next beautiful thing that happened this year.
So at the beginning of the year, I actually did a little bit of a reset. I took some time away from the family and I did a little bit of soul searching and just trying to, I guess, find what my next steps were in life in general.
You did the Eat, Pray, Love thing, but you stayed in the country. You stayed with me. You kept your family. You just took a break.
And one of the things I determined was that I've spent a lot of my life being held back by fear. And I didn't want to keep living my life like that. I wanted to be able to move forward with greater confidence in my own ability, but be okay with making mistakes and looking a bit silly if I get things wrong. And so my goal was to just get out of my comfort zones as much as I could. And one of the first things that I did was I signed up for art school. This was huge. It has been an emotional roller coaster this year as I've navigated that. I have never done art before. I have always believed I am not good at art. And after I finished my first painting, I literally cried because for the first time in my life, there was evidence right in front of me that suggested that I could no longer say I wasn't good at this. There was this beautiful beauty developing right before my eyes, and I was part of that process.
So I have to jump in again. I'm so sorry, but this is one of these things that really sort of blows my mind, and I've struggled with it so much. If I was to go and do an art class, I guarantee you, I could do art classes for like 12 years and still not draw what you drew on day one. I need to put that out there, because the evidence, when you say there was evidence that you could draw, it was a masterpiece, and they've only gotten better.
I've really loved the process. It's been such a challenging but such a rewarding process.
I also want to highlight, it's taken us 24, 25 years of child rearing before we've gotten to a point where you've got the time, the capacity and the willingness to invest in yourself like this. I wish you'd been doing it from an earlier age, but for a variety of reasons it hasn't happened, but you're doing it now. And I would encourage any mums who are listening to our conversation right now to consider what they could invest in that's for them, that's productive, it's not sitting down and staring at a phone. It's actually going out and being creative. It's true recreation or recreation.
When I asked the kids what I might put on the list, Annie, our 16-year-old, said that I had tried lots of new things. Art school was one of those things, but as you acknowledged last week, we had some pretty challenging holidays throughout the year, and one of them was the solo family holiday where I took the kids to Cairns because you got so sick you couldn't fly.
Oh, no.
And I had never navigated hiring a car, doing an Airbnb, actually navigating in a new space before, all on my own. And the girls were blown away at how calm I was through that process. They were really proud of me. And Annie acknowledged that while we were on that holiday, I also had to navigate a 9-year-old who got so sick she couldn't leave the house. And so we had to take turns on who was going to stay home with her so that the other kids could actually have a holiday. We were driving an hour and a half at a time to do the activities that we'd planned. And I navigated all of that. And that was a huge win for me as well. And what I loved about it was that it wasn't the perfect Instagram-worthy holiday, but it was actually a beautiful holiday. And part of that was because I navigated things that, again, I had told myself I wasn't competent and capable of doing on my own. So that was really cool. But I also navigated my very first overseas trip in July, and that was huge. Number one, to be able to have that time to myself, but number two, to navigate all of the things that you just do and take for granted that everybody does. You know, getting on airplanes, doing transfers, getting picked up at the other end, meeting lots of new people every day, living on campus like a uni student for a week. Like, all of those things were such new experiences for me, and I just loved and relished them. And I think it was actually a real bittersweet moment for me, because there was this acknowledgement that this was such an amazing experience, and yet because of my own belief systems for so many years, these are experiences that I have stopped myself from being able to have much earlier in life. That was a huge highlight.
I love thinking about how this year has really been a year of investment in who you're becoming. Like, this has really been a year that you have forced yourself into situations that demand growth and that have really challenged you. I love it. Is there anything else that you wanted to highlight that has gone well before we dive into the what didn't go so well?
I'll do a little bit of a lightning round. We survived renos in our teeny tiny house. We've done major renos before, but this experience was like nothing we've experienced before because our house is so small. So to do a tiny reno meant our whole house got turned upside down. That was a bit of a challenge. We became grandparents, absolute highlight of the year. I spent a lot of time working on my own emotional regulation. This is a work in progress. I have got so far to go. It's ridiculous. But it's also been a skill that I have been working really hard on with each of our girls. And I have seen such massive movement and positive directions with each of them as a result. And the flow-on effect of that is that my relationship with each of them has grown in such beautiful ways this year. And I'm really, really grateful for that. We've navigated some really major challenges, and those challenges have reminded me of how many beautiful people I have in my life.
Oh, yeah.
And in some ways, I was in awe of the people who showed up, and yet it was a no-brainer that those would be the people that showed up. It just still blows me away that they showed up, if that makes sense.
Yeah, of course.
And one of my final ones was just that I, for the first time probably in a real sense, I listened to my gut, and it took a lot of courage and a lot of persuasion from you. And we pulled the kids out last term from school. That was huge for me. It was a really, really big deal. And in spite of the fact that things haven't gone the way I had anticipated they would go, I am so grateful that I had the courage to follow through on the things that you and I had spoken about.
Time will tell whether we'll remain grateful. But at the moment, it feels good. Okay, so let's do a fairly quick one here. What hasn't gone so well?
My list is pretty small because they're such big things.
Oh, okay. All right. Let's hear it.
I have really struggled to find my rhythm for life in general this year. It's been a really tricky year of a lack of motivation and a lack in sense of direction and purpose in my own personal life. And that overarching theme flows into obviously every aspect of my living.
So last week I talked about how I was struggling with my rhythms and routines and that sort of thing. Do you think I can blame you for that? The fact
No,
that
I think it's the other way around.
you think-
When you're functioning, I do so much better.
Okay. This upcoming year, we've got to dial this in. All right. What else didn't go so well?
It would just be homeschooling. So the acknowledgement was we weren't homeschooling, we were unschooling the kids, and I had this grand plan of how everything would flow. We pulled the kids out on Monday.
Yep.
You broke your back the following Saturday.
That's right.
And a handful of weeks after the aftermath of that, we lost our nephew Logan.
Right.
And that has literally turned our lives upside down. And so the idea that I would spend, days at the beach with the kids and, kind of immersed in a green space went completely out the window for all of those challenging reasons. And yet in spite of that, there has been beauty in the process. So they're my things that didn't go so well.
Okay, well, let's talk about learnings and plans for next year based on, some of it's random and some of it's related exactly to what you've talked about. What have you got on the list? Let's step through it.
Every year I try to pick a word or a theme of what I would like to work on this year. And because of the way the year has gone, I actually had lost track of what that word was. And as I was flicking through my photos, one of my friends had done a beautiful word art for me at the beginning of the year. Do you know what my word was?
I have no recollection at all.
My word was joy.
Yeah, right. Okay.
I remember in the early days talking to your mum and saying, the kids were really trying me and I kept praying for patience and it just got really hard.
Yep.
And she would say to me, Kylie, when you pray for courage, God doesn't give you courage. He gives you a lion.
A lion. I love that.
And I feel like this year there has been so many opportunities where it would be so easy to not find joy. And it has really tested my capacity too. But a quote that you shared recently was just this acknowledgement that joy is the ability to see beauty. And I think about the hard experiences that we've gone through. And time again, I have been blown away with the beauty that has existed in spite of the hard. And so while I haven't necessarily done a brilliant job of keeping joy as a focus point for me this year, as I look back on 2023, I can see so much beauty in our lives. The other thing that stands out to me is life is as good as your relationships. Throughout our lives as parents, there have been times where we have looked at one or all of our children as being problematic. They have been really, really challenging.
And we've had to break that, right? Because the kids aren't problems. They're just having problems.
And so really dialing into the acknowledgement that they are having challenge in their life as opposed to them being the challenge has elevated the joy that we experience in our home. Another lesson I've learned is offering grace to myself and to others. This has been a really huge learning for me, recognizing at times that I don't have the same capacity to do what I want to do or need to do because of the experiences or the challenges that we're having in our lives. And being okay with that has been, I'm going to say, life altering, but it has also enlarged the relationships around me. And I think the last thing in relation to that is that for me, compassion is the lifeblood of my relationships. especially with our children, as I have tapped into the ability to feel compassion for the challenges that they are experiencing, it has drawn me to them instead of me seeing them as the problem. And that has been such a beautiful shift in our home, and specifically as a mother-daughter relationship.
I had a bike ride with somebody. Well, somebody came along on a bike ride recently and had a conversation along those lines. And this person just kept on. He was absolutely convinced that the best way to get through to kids is to slam them, to be on them, to make sure that they understand the rules, that kids these days need rules and boundaries, and they need parents that tell them how it's going to be. No matter how much I tried to explain that that's going to turn them away, he was just so adamant. And hearing you say that is such a beautiful reinforcement of everything that we try to share, that it's raising kids in a nurturing and kind and loving home that actually increases the likelihood that they're going to want to develop healthy, safe boundaries for themselves. I mean, half of our parenting work or more is done by getting that stuff right. I love that insight. It's so, so valuable. Well, Kylie, it's been a big year. Is there anything else you want to share?
My last, and this is probably the most poignant one for me, was actually the words of my art teacher at one point as I was struggling with a piece of art. She said, and I don't even think she realized just how poignant it was for me, but she said, give yourself permission to make ugly art. When you're sitting in an art class surrounded by people who are so much more competent at this than you are, it's so easy to judge yourself and your efforts harshly. And it wasn't until I came home and I thought about it, and I thought, how often do we expect perfection of ourselves as we're learning? The ability to be who we want to be is a work in progress, and it gets messy and it gets really ugly. And while ever we focus on the ugly, we actually lose sight of what we're trying to achieve. And so for me, this actually has become probably my life lesson, is recognizing that I'm going to look ugly. I'm going to sound ugly. I'm just going to make ugly so much. But if I can give myself permission to make ugly, there is going to be a moment in time that through that process, beauty will shine through. And that's what I'm trying to achieve.
And that's when you find joy, because where there is beauty, there is joy.
Yeah.
The Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Rule. I'm from Bridge Media. Craig Bruce is our executive producer. Hey, we hope we've given you some inspo as you reflect on the year that was for you and consider what next year might be. Thanks so much for listening. We can't wait to join you again tomorrow on the Happy Families podcast.